This story begins in the United States, in Columbus, Ohio, at a branch of Fifth Third Bank located just off West Broad Street. The building sat between a dry cleaner and a discount furniture store. Nothing about it suggested it would later become the focus of federal investigation, courtroom testimony, and national media attention. On the outside, it looked like hundreds of other banks across the country. Glass doors, a modest parking lot, security cameras visible but not intimidating. People passed it every day without thinking about it. That was the point. The date was April 18th, 2008. It was a Friday. The weather was mild, clear skies, no storms, no disruptions. A day that followed the predictable rhythm of a working city. At 8:02 a.m., the first employee arrived. Her name was Karen Mitchell, a senior teller who had worked at that branch for 12 years. She parked in the same spot she always used, gathered her purse, and walked inside with her keys already in her hand. She would later tell investigators that nothing felt unusual that morning. That detail would appear in official transcripts. At 8:11 a.m., Brian Lawson, the branch manager, arrived. He was 46 years old, married, and known among staff as cautious and procedural. He disarmed the alarm, completed the required security checks, and unlocked the vault area. At 8:19 a.m., two more tellers arrived. By 8:30 a.m., the bank was fully staffed. No one noticed anything out of place. West Broad Street was busy but not crowded. Delivery trucks moved in and out of parking spaces. Customers walked from nearby bus stops. A police cruiser passed once, slow and routine. Crime statistics for the area showed nothing unusual. No recent robberies, no violent incidents tied to the bank. This mattered later. Defense attorneys would argue that the location did not fit the profile of a high-risk target. Prosecutors would argue that this was precisely why it was chosen. At 8:37 a.m., a man parked a dark green Ford Taurus in the lot across the street. Security footage later captured the moment. The footage shows him sitting in the car for several minutes. He does not appear nervous. He does not pace. He does not look around excessively. Investigators would later identify him as Daniel Harper, age 38. At the time, no one knew his name. Daniel Harper had no mask, no gloves. He was dressed in plain clothes, jeans, a black jacket, and a baseball cap with no logo. This was not accidental. Daniel Harper had worked as an armored transport driver 5 years earlier. That fact would become central to the case. He understood bank schedules. He understood cash handling procedures. He understood response times. He also understood something else. Most people inside banks were not trained for violence. At 9:00 a.m., the doors opened. Customers began to enter slowly. An elderly man depositing a check, a woman paying a utility bill, a small business owner withdrawing cash for payroll. By 9:09 a.m., there were 11 people inside the bank. 6 customers, 5 employees. Daniel Harper exited his car. Witnesses later described him as calm. One customer remembered thinking he looked like someone going to work. Security footage confirms this. He walked normally. He did not rush. He did not look at the cameras. At 9:12 a.m., he reached the glass doors. The entry bell sounded. Karen Mitchell looked up. This moment would later be replayed in her mind many times. Daniel Harper stood near the entrance for approximately 4 seconds. Then he spoke. His voice was clear, controlled. "This is a robbery," he said. Everyone listened carefully. He did not shout. He did not threaten. He produced a handgun and held it low, visible but not raised. The entire room froze. This is where reality differs from fiction. There was no screaming, no sudden movement, no heroics. Everyone complied. That is what training teaches. Karen Mitchell raised her hands. Brian Lawson stepped away from his desk. Customers backed away from the counters. Daniel Harper instructed Carl, the security guard, to place his weapon on the floor and step back. Carl complied. Daniel Harper knew the vault schedule. He knew when cash shipments arrived. He knew which employees had access. He directed Brian Lawson to open the vault. Brian would later testify that he believed Daniel knew exactly what he was doing. The vault door opened at 9:17 a.m. Inside were cash drawers prepared for the day. No die packs were triggered. No alarms were pressed. This was later described by law enforcement as textbook control. Daniel Harper knew the vault schedule. He knew when cash shipments arrived. He knew which employees had access. He directed Brian Lawson to open the vault. Brian would later testify that he believed Daniel knew exactly what he was doing. The vault door opened at 9:17 a.m. Inside were cash drawers prepared for the day. No die packs were triggered. No alarms were pressed. The most striking detail reported by witnesses was the silence. No yelling, no crying, just instructions and compliance. Daniel Harper placed cash into a black duffel bag. He did not rush. He exited the vault at 9:23 a.m. At 9:25 a.m., Daniel Harper walked out of the bank. Security footage shows him pausing briefly, turning and saying, "Stay here for 5 minutes." Then he left. The alarm was triggered at 9:26 a.m. Police arrived at 9:31 a.m. Daniel Harper was gone. To understand how the heist unfolded so cleanly, investigators had to step backward in time. What happened inside the bank took less than 15 minutes. What led up to it took months. Real bank heists are not built on impulse. They are built on familiarity, on knowing how a place breathes when no one is watching. For Daniel Harper, the planning phase began quietly, without accomplices, without written notes, and without the kind of activity that usually draws attention. That was not luck. That was experience. Daniel Harper did not grow up imagining a bank robbery. He was raised in Indiana, graduated high school, and worked a series of stable jobs. For several years, he was employed by a regional armored transport company. His job was not glamorous. He moved cash between banks, retailers, and processing centers. But that job gave him something important. It gave him an education in systems. When banks were most vulnerable, how cash was staged before opening, which procedures were followed strictly, and which were treated casually. Former co-workers would later describe him as quiet, observant, and competent. No disciplinary issues, no criminal record at the time. That made him invisible. Investigators later determined that Daniel began watching the West Broad Street branch approximately 6 weeks before the robbery. There was no evidence of trespassing, no suspicious inquiries, no phone calls asking about vaults or schedules. Instead, Daniel did what many people do without being noticed. He learned. He sat in his car. He walked past the building. He entered as a customer. Security footage showed him visiting the bank 3 times in the weeks before the robbery. Each time he stayed less than 10 minutes. Each time he performed a normal transaction, depositing a small amount of cash, asking a general question, standing in line. No one remembered him afterward. That was the goal. Banks follow rules, but people follow habits. Daniel was not interested in the written policies. He was interested in what actually happened. He noted which tellers arrived early, where the security guard usually stood, how long the vault took to open, how many customers were present shortly after opening. He learned that Fridays were ideal. Cash levels were higher. Staffing was full. Customer traffic was steady but manageable. Most importantly, he learned that alarms were rarely triggered immediately. Employees were trained to comply first. One of the most critical aspects of the plan was emotional control. Daniel understood that panic created unpredictability, so he designed the heist to feel procedural. No mask meant he looked human. No shouting meant people listened. Clear instructions meant fewer mistakes. This was not about intimidation through fear. It was about authority through certainty. The handgun used in the robbery was legally purchased years earlier. Ballistics analysis later confirmed it had never been fired during the crime. Daniel did not brandish it wildly. He held it low, visible, controlled. Witnesses later said they believed he would use it if necessary, but also believed he did not want to. That perception mattered. Fear without chaos. Daniel did not plan a dramatic escape. No high-speed chase, no accomplice vehicle waiting with the engine running. He parked in a lot across the street because it blended in. Security footage showed that his car had been there for over 30 minutes before the robbery. Nothing about it appeared urgent. After leaving the bank, he drove away calmly, merging into traffic. No one followed. Despite the preparation, Daniel did not control everything. There were elements he assumed would work in his favor, and they did, at first. But investigations are not limited to the moment of the crime. They extend outward. Daniel did not account for time after the heist. He believed that because the robbery was clean, the investigation would stall. He underestimated how methodical modern financial crime investigations had become. Within hours, FBI agents reviewed surveillance footage. Analysts tracked cash serial numbers. Past employee records were examined. Daniel's familiarity with banking systems made him confident. That confidence would later narrow the suspect pool. Investigators noticed details that did not stand out to witnesses. The way he spoke, the instructions he gave, the knowledge he demonstrated. This was not an amateur. This was someone who understood banks from the inside. That realization changed the direction of the case. Serial numbers from the stolen cash were entered into national databases. Daniel avoided large purchases at first. Weeks later, cash from the robbery appeared during unrelated transactions in another state. That mattered. A narrowing focus. Investigators reviewed employment records from armored transport companies and banks within a specific radius. Daniel Harper's name appeared on a short list. At that point, he was still living his normal life, going to work, paying rent, speaking to neighbors. He believed the hardest part was over. He was wrong. They end with paperwork. After the robbery at the West Broad Street branch, the building returned to quiet within hours. Customers went home. Employees gave statements. The glass doors were locked, then unlocked again the next morning. From the outside, it looked like life had resumed. But behind the scenes, something else had begun. Within minutes of the alarm being triggered, local police secured the scene. Within an hour, federal agents arrived. Bank robberies fall under federal jurisdiction, and the response followed a familiar pattern. Surveillance footage was collected. Witness statements were recorded. Timelines were established down to the minute. What stood out immediately was what didn't happen. No injuries, no panic alarms triggered mid-robbery, no struggle with security. That absence told investigators something important. This was a controlled event. Employees and customers were interviewed separately. Their stories matched in structure, if not in detail. They all described a calm voice, clear instructions, no unnecessary movement. Karen Mitchell described the robber as focused. Brian Lawson said he believed the man knew banking better than most customers. The security guard, Carl Thompson, said something that would later appear in the case file. He didn't treat the gun like a threat. He treated it like a tool. That sentence mattered. The footage showed Daniel Harper entering and exiting clearly. No mask, no attempt to hide his face, no gloves. At first glance, this looked like arrogance, but investigators saw something else. Confidence. He did not expect to be identified quickly. He expected time to work in his favor. Still, his face was now recorded from multiple angles. That mattered later. Federal analysts created a behavioral profile based on the footage and testimony. They concluded the suspect had prior exposure to banking procedures. He was comfortable giving commands. He expected compliance, not resistance. This narrowed the suspect pool dramatically. Investigators were no longer looking for an impulsive criminal. They were looking for someone with insider familiarity. Every bill taken from the bank was traceable. Serial numbers were logged. Patterns were flagged. Daniel Harper understood this risk. That is why he avoided banks, avoided large purchases, and avoided attention. For the first few weeks, the money remained invisible. Then, it didn't. 3 weeks after the robbery, in a different state, a man was pulled over for a minor traffic violation. He paid a fine in cash. One of the bills matched a serial number from the robbery. This did not identify Daniel Harper, but it confirmed something important. The money was moving. Investigators widened their net. They reviewed employment records from armored transport companies, former bank employees in the region, individuals with access knowledge but no current banking role. Daniel Harper appeared on a list of fewer than 20 names. That was progress. Daniel did not know he was on a list. He went to work. He paid rent. He made small purchases in cash. Agents did not rush. They watched. They noted his routines. They waited for a mistake. What ultimately draws attention is not planning. It is behavior over time. Daniel began to relax. He used cash more freely. He traveled more often. He stopped being careful. 2 months after the robbery, Daniel applied for a short-term loan. During the routine background review, his prior employment history came up. An investigator reviewing the file noticed something familiar. The name, the timeline, the proximity. That coincidence mattered. With Daniel now a person of interest, agents returned to the surveillance footage. They compared facial features, posture, movement. The match was strong enough to justify a warrant. Daniel's apartment was searched quietly, without spectacle. Inside, investigators found clothing matching the robbery footage, a handgun matching the description, remaining cash, some with traceable serial numbers. There was no confrontation. Daniel was not home. By the time Daniel Harper's case reached federal court, the robbery itself felt distant. The moments of fear inside the bank had been replaced by transcripts, evidence folders, and carefully worded arguments. What remained was not excitement. It was consequence. Daniel Harper was charged with armed bank robbery, use of a firearm during a federal crime, interstate transport of stolen funds. Each charge carried mandatory sentencing guidelines. The evidence against him was methodical, not dramatic. Surveillance footage, recovered cash, employment records, witness testimony. No single piece was overwhelming on its own. Together, they were decisive. The trial lasted 6 days. Prosecutors did not focus on fear or spectacle. They focused on intent. They showed how Daniel's background gave him knowledge, how that knowledge was used deliberately. That, too, mattered. Daniel Harper was arrested 2 days later at a job site. He did not resist. He asked one question. How long did it take? The answer was not given. During questioning, Daniel said very little. He did not deny involvement. He did not confess. He listened. This silence would later shape the trial. When news broke that a suspect had been arrested, the reaction in Columbus was muted. No celebration, no outrage, just relief. Employees returned to work. Customers returned to routine. The system absorbed the shock and moved on. By the time Daniel Harper's case reached federal court, the robbery itself felt distant. The moments of fear inside the bank had been replaced by transcripts, evidence folders, and carefully worded arguments. What remained was not excitement. It was consequence. Daniel Harper was charged with armed bank robbery, use of a firearm during a federal crime, interstate transport of stolen funds. Each charge carried mandatory sentencing guidelines. The evidence against him was methodical, not dramatic. Surveillance footage, recovered cash, employment records, witness testimony. No single piece was overwhelming on its own. Together, they were decisive. The trial lasted 6 days. Prosecutors did not focus on fear or spectacle. They focused on intent. They showed how Daniel's background gave him knowledge, how that knowledge was used deliberately, how planning turned familiarity into a weapon. Defense attorneys argued that no one was hurt. They emphasized the calm nature of the robbery, the absence of violence, the lack of prior criminal history. The jury listened. Then they deliberated for less than 4 hours. Daniel Harper was found guilty on all counts. There was no visible reaction. He did not speak. His posture did not change. People who observed the trial later said he looked more tired than angry. At sentencing, the judge spoke carefully. He acknowledged that no one had been physically harmed, but he emphasized something else. This court cannot measure crime only by bloodshed. It must measure it by violation of trust. Daniel Harper was sentenced to 17 years in federal prison. No possibility of parole. The sentence reflected policy, not emotion. For the people who were inside the bank that day, the story did not end with the verdict. Karen Mitchell transferred to a different branch. Rachel Nguyen left banking altogether. Brian Lawson remained, but described the bank differently afterward. He said it no longer felt neutral. Hawthorne Federal Credit Union increased security. New cameras, new protocols, more training. But no amount of policy restored the sense of certainty that existed before. That loss is harder to quantify than stolen money. From a distance, the robbery looked successful. No injuries, no panic, a clean escape. But real life does not freeze at the moment of exit. It keeps going. Time is the final investigator, and time favors systems. This case did not change federal law. It did not reshape banking policy nationwide, but it revealed something important. Heists succeed only briefly. Order returns slowly, but completely. What feels like control is often just a delay. Daniel Harper is incarcerated in a federal correctional facility. He works. He follows routine. He lives inside structure, the same structure he once believed he could outthink. Real documentary stories do not end with excitement. They end with understanding. The bank reopened. The town moved on. The system held. The heist became a case study. A reminder that calm does not equal safety. That planning does not equal freedom. That time does not forget.